That's good. Hey, everybody. Welcome. My name's Pete, one of the pastors here at Rise, and filling in for Brandon this morning, who's in Illinois preaching at a cool conference. But welcome. It's great to have you. And if you are maybe kind of new with us or just joining us, we are finishing up what's been kind of this 4-week discussion. We've been calling it 2020 Vision. And essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote, a second letter he wrote to his ancient church in the city of Corinth. And it ties in, we've been doing this for a while. We studied the entire first letter in October, November. And then kind of coming into the new year, we're thinking about how we want to continue. And what's cool about this is at the very end of Paul's second letter, so he's written 2 letters to these people, and they're pretty heavy. They're pretty in your face. A lot of like, hey, stop doing that kind of thing. And at the very end of the second letter, he closes with this sentence that's very powerful. And he says this, it's almost like an opportunity to see the world differently moving forward, sort of a breath of fresh air. So he closes with this in 2 Corinthians 13:11. He says, finally, in the end, brothers and sisters, rejoice. Strive for full restoration or maturity. There's different ways to read that word. Encourage one another, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. And so what we've been doing is over the past few weeks, we've been sort of taking this sentence apart and looking at each piece of it as a way of moving forward, a vision for 2020, whatever, but just moving forward in our lives. What does it mean to see what God has for us? And so we looked at the idea of rejoice, like choosing to seek joy, to let that be a part of our lives moving forward. And Brandon talked about this idea of restoration and maturity, and we saw how he had this word, katarizo, that talks about mending your nets and examining, letting the Holy Spirit examine in our hearts the places where we might have holes in our nets that we need God to mend moving forward. And then last week it was kind of fun, this whole idea of encouragement, of being people moving forward that build each other up. And if you're with us last week, we all wrote encouraging notes to people, and I even heard some cool stories about that coming out of people. I got this random note. It's neat the way that God works. But this morning, we're going to end this talk looking at the final part of his statement, and it's huge. It's a really big piece. So Paul ends by telling us to be of one mind and to live in peace, something that almost seems impossible at times. Let's watch this quick video.
Peace. Is there anything more desired yet elusive, more sought after yet seemingly far from reach? The long memory of human history is scarred by the unanswered cries for peace, a littered battlefield of humanity's unfulfilled hope for an end to our constant conflict and suffering. But as war, famine, disease, and terrorism continue to strike at the heart of our security and safety, it only furthers our awareness of the unimagined brokenness of our world and the frailty within which we live and breathe as but a vapor across each mile of its coveted surface. And with the ever-increasing wonders of the digital age, we have worked to all but completely safeguard ourselves from any hope of blissful ignorance. With each new cycle of the earth, an incessant stream of talking heads recycle a relentless barrage of bad news. Our eyes and ears persistently shift from one illuminated LCD screen to the next in order to consume a virtual assault of updates, breaking headlines, and urgent announcements, all ensuring our continued awareness of the chaos and trouble within which we live. We couldn't forget or ignore the turmoil surrounding us if we tried. We sense it, feel it, hear it all around us. There is no peace, and so we yearn for it, believing within our depths it's possible, but just beyond our grasp. We continue to hope against reason to find calm from the winds of our hostilities, a stilling to the abrasive waves that surge the ocean of our lives as we take in the disarray around us. But time and again it eludes, slipping like water between our trembling fingers with every cannon fired, each new terror spoken, and every innocent's grave freshly dug. True peace, it seems, has always been nothing more than a fanciful wish for beauty pageant display or hollow holiday sentiment. Until...
So recently, my 9-year-old daughter, Kira, came home and asked me for help on her homework. and I wasn't quite ready for what came next. I know this isn't a Common Core story. I have some of those. She was doing a biography, writing a report, and kids grow up so fast. It's like, when did you learn how to read? Oh, okay. And of all the people she could have picked, famous, people that did, she picked someone who didn't do anything because she couldn't. She chose to read about a young girl named Anne Frank. And most of you probably know who Anne Frank is. I assume a young Jewish girl who was murdered at the age of 12 in the Auschwitz Nazi death camp. Suffice to say, I was not ready for that piece of parenthood. It snuck up on me. Because suddenly, here's my little girl reading the diary of somebody else's baby girl, just a few years older than mine, and it's telling about her tragic short life lived in constant fear and hiding and ending in this heart-rending, devastating murder. And as I'm reading her essay, I had this just almost like, why is my 9-year-old writing about Hitler and Nazis? And I wanted to no, you shouldn't be thinking about that. I wanted to protect her from it, right? And as if sort of sensing the weirdness emanating from me, my daughter sort of looking at her paper, just softly, doesn't even look up, goes, Dad, would anyone ever come to our house and try to kill us too? And then to make it worse, she started asking about 9/11, and I'm like, what? And I know this was the point where I was supposed to put on my, doctor of theology hat and explain how the world works and all this stuff, but I really just was suddenly comparing myself to the Hulk and telling her she'll be fine and no one will ever do that to her, because I want to protect her from worry and fear. I don't want her laying in bed at night thinking about that stuff. I want her to grow up in a world where people aren't trying to murder each other, where violence, anger, and strife aren't everywhere, right? I want her to experience and thrive in a world of goodness and beauty and peace, not like Anne's story. And you understand what I'm saying, don't you? You get it, right? There's something inside of us. It's ingrained in our hearts. Every society around the world, everybody you talk to, it doesn't matter what language they speak, what color they are, whatever, everybody has it, right? This longing and yearning for peace in our world. The hope of a life without violence and terror. But the truth is uglier. Because for how much we hope, our planet is dark, and Anne's story is true. And it's a reminder of how terrible and cruel human beings can treat each other. And part of being a grown-up is maybe verbalizing, oh, honey, I'm big and strong, they won't get in here. But in my head, I'm like, I can't control everything. Peace is fleeting. And sometimes we think about it, and other times we just try to push it in the back of our minds. I don't want to think about it, right? But there is a sickness in humanity that we all know is there, don't we? We sense it, we see it. But I use that word sickness very intentionally. Because the thing about the word sickness, if I say something is sick, I'm actually implying there is a healthy. Sickness implies something is wrong that shouldn't be the way that it is. And in fact, this is actually what the Bible teaches us. That this yearning in your heart that you have for peace is not some just dreamy, fanciful wish made against the cold, dead reality of evolution, right? Well, we're just animals floating through space. This is our world. There's something inside of you that says, no, that is not our world. There's something wrong here. We're not an accident. This isn't how it should be. It's faint. It's a glimmer, but it's there. Something inside of you that says, this is not the way the world is supposed to be. It's not the way it was created to be. In fact, I would say this, our longing for a better world exists because there is a better world to be had. The thing inside of you that cries out for a better world does that because it knows inherently that this is not the way things are supposed to be. And that alone flies in the face of atheism that just says, well, it's all a cosmic accident. If it is, if all of this is just random chance, why is it that every human being senses it's wrong? Evolution by itself wouldn't create that in us, but it does. There's a yearning in our heart for peace because we know it's the way that things are supposed to be. And the Bible actually confirms that to us. It starts right in the beginning when you open to the first pages. We see the story of God sort of poetically creating all things in this sort of 7-day picture. And then it says this in chapter 2, verse 2, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, and on the seventh day, he rested from his work. Now, too often we hear that and we think of like this picture of like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm just gonna take a nap, you know? That's not what he means by rested. The people who originally, there was their language, the Jewish people, that's not how they would have thought of that. Instead, what it means is to rest in their culture was synonymous. It was the same as peace. It was things are now under control. Things are as they should be, and therefore there's peace, there's rest. To seek rest is for things to be calm, to be as they should be. It's like, recently I made a mistake when I decided that I can fix my own toilet. No, I can't. But I was sitting there, I got wrenches, I don't know what this does, and I had the whole thing taken apart. There's just a mess everywhere, and finally I'm like, I'm calling a plumber. And I did, and he showed up, and he's like, oh, I can. And eventually everything's fixed, it's back together, and there's that moment where I sort of like lean against the wall, and I'm like, yeah, it flushes, no water anywhere. Rest. It's not necessarily because I'm tired, it's because things are now back the way they're supposed to be. It's doing what it was supposed to do, right? And now the only real source of peace left is I have to go apologize to my family for all the yelling and screaming and throwing things. But there's rest here, right? Things are as they should be. Chaos has been controlled. There's rest. And for God to rest meant that when he had finished creating everything, he stepped back and he looked at it and he said, it is good. Great. Rest. It's as he intended. It's perfect. And he rested in that perfection. And for the Jewish people to whom this was written, they had a way of speaking of this kind of rest, this state of existence where things are as they should be. A reality that I am living as God intended, as all is created. And they called it shalom, which we often translate as peace. But it doesn't just mean peace like we're not fighting. It means completeness or wholeness or health. Sometimes you could use it for blessing. The reason why they would use, you look at what completeness, soundness, health. If you think of this for a second, what they're saying when they say shalom is in this moment, what we're seeking, we say, oh, we pray for shalom, shalom be on you, peace be with you. They were saying a yearning in their heart. They were expressing a opportunity to live the way that God intended because completeness, soundness, health, blessing is what God made us for. He made a world that he said is good. It is at rest. And when we are not at rest, when there's chaos and war and violence and all this stuff around us, we're like, this isn't how it's supposed to be. You're right, it's not. And the call for shalom, for peace, was to say, let's bring it back. Let's restore it. As a couple weeks ago, Brandon talked about this idea of mending your nets, right? Of restoration, that there's something wrong, let's fix it. Fixing it is coming to peace, shalom. Bringing things back the way they're supposed to be, to live as God created us, free from war and violence and worry and fear, free from having to explain to my 9-year-old daughter what a Nazi is. That is not the world that God created. And it's why something screams inside of me that something's wrong, because something is wrong. It isn't what he intended. He created a world at peace, and they called it Eden, paradise. Paradise doesn't just mean flowers and, feed me grapes. Paradise for the Jewish people was peace, shalom, the world that God made as he intended it. And it's here we come back to this whole idea of this series of vision of 2020, of giving a vision for the future. A huge part of having a vision for the future is, can you actually see in your mind's eye what the world is supposed to be like? Because what the world is supposed to be like is the call that Jesus came to give us, to redeem us, to pull us out of the brokenness, to heal us and restore us and give us the kind of life that we were made for, right? To have a vision of saying, what could the world look like if we did it in shalom, the way that God intended? That's a vision worth pursuing. That we are called by God to join him in the restoration process of his world. I mean, that is the root, that's the heartbeat of Christianity. To choose peace is part of it. And this is really where the rubber kind of meets the road, because of course there are terrible things in our world that have nothing to do with any of us, right? Like cancer and hurricanes and things. I understand it's a whole different conversation. But true peace, the lack of it in our world, is at the end of the day our fault, because peace is a choice. Peace is a choice. When God creates everything perfect and says it's great, it's good, it's awesome, and he rests, the reason why it's no longer good and the reason why there's no longer rest is because of us. Because peace is a choice and we don't choose it. The reason why the world is not as it should be is because humans have a choice in how we treat each other, in how we respond to each other. We have a choice. And too often we choose to take advantage of each other, to steal, to take what's not ours, to put down others so we can feel better about ourselves. And we create this thing. We use violence to get what we want. And then when something like that is done to us, it's my turn to respond. I'm going to do it back to you. And we just create this cycle. And in fact, if you step back and read the book of Genesis, and I know Genesis is like a lot of weird stories, if you sort of looked at it from like a big bird's eye view, that's what you would see. The book of Genesis is figuratively humanity being flushed down the toilet, where it starts with one person saying, I don't want to obey God anymore, and then 4 or 5 generations later, people have multiple wives and are murdering each other. Like, what happens? What happens is, I hurt you, you hurt me back, now I'm even hurt, and now I hurt more people, and it just cycles out of control. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, usually becomes 2 eyes for an eye, and all your teeth for a tooth. I hurt you, you hurt me, I take another swing, and it just escalates. It gets worse and worse, and suddenly, a couple centuries later, people are flying planes into buildings because all the anger and hatred has been building in our hearts year after year after year. And we look around and we say, why is this world so broken? Because it starts with us and our decisions. He stole that promotion, it should have been mine, I'm gonna get him back, right? You don't know what she said about me. She ruined my friendships, now it's my turn. Yeah, it is your turn. It just goes on, and the Hatfield and McCoys are killing each other for hundreds of years. What God created beautiful is now in flames because of us. So what's to be done, right? What is to be done? Well, forgive me an oversimplification, but if you want to live in the world as God intended, you have to live in the world as God intended. If you want this world to be the place that God made it to be, you, as his image bearer on the planet, have got to live the way that God intended you to live, because we are the ones tasked with caring for this world. It is us. If you want the world to be different, we have to be different. You're like, oh, this is like a self-help speech. A little bit, I don't know. It's true, though. It is. We have to live the way God intended if we want the world to be as God intended. So when Jesus comes and says, why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? What was behind that was, I came to change the way you're living your lives, to fix this planet. We want to do something different. Peace is a choice, and I want to give you the choice. This is why God has called us to choose peace, because peace is the way that he intended it to be. So when God looks at you and through the scriptures or whatever and says, peace, choose peace, he's saying, live the way I always created you to live. It's not a brand new thing. It's let's go back to what it was before, when it was perfect. And eventually God showed up in person, right? In the form of Jesus, he walked among us, and he said this to us in Matthew 5:9, blessed, right, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. This word peacemakers in the ancient Greek means making peace, and it's simple, it means make peace. Think about that sentence. Those people who make peace will be children of God. Do you know that every human being was supposed to be a child of God? But Jesus is saying the real children of God will be those who make peace, because they will be living the way that God created them to live. children of God live the way that God created them to live. He said, you'll be blessed when you do that. You will be God's people when you choose peace. That's a decision, it's a choice. And that sentence gets repeated over and over and over in the New Testament. I did a quick study. I found like 74 verses or something, so I picked a few of them. Look at this idea everywhere. In 1 Corinthians, God has called us to live in peace. Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, and peace. Colossians, as members of one body, you were called to peace. 1 Thessalonians, live in peace with each other. It's everywhere. And it's also clear that all over this is a choice, a decision. In Ephesians, he says, make every effort to keep unity of the peace, the bond of peace. Hebrews 12:14, make every effort to live at peace. James, peacemakers who sow in peace reap in harvest, meaning it's your choice. A peacemaker sows in peace. 1 Peter, seek peace, pursue it. This isn't a pie in the sky, maybe like this magical thing will fall on me and there'll be peace. Let's all just pray for peace. He's saying, you choose peace. Yes, pray for peace, great, but choose peace. Seek it. Make every effort. It's a command by our Creator because it's part of restoring and fixing His world, to putting the world back to right, to living the way that He intended us. It's part of this process of restoring the net. We sit there a couple weeks ago and Brandon talks about what does it mean to let the Spirit examine? Like part of us restoring ourselves is what does it mean to choose peace? And it's our decision. It's a choice, which is much easier said than done, right? Like everything I've said, we're like, yeah, we know, but it is really hard. It is really hard. There's a reason why our entire species can say we yearn for peace, and yet nobody chooses it. Because there's this just annoying, difficult catch-22 when it comes to peace. And it makes it so elusive and rare in our world. And it's this, peace is really easy to talk about when you see other people fighting, right? When you turn on the news and bombs are exploding in the Middle East, why don't they just make peace, It's really easy when your friends are fighting and you're like, you guys just need to make up and make peace, right? Looking at other people fighting and squabbling, it's just, I just wish we could all get along. But in fact, true peace is a decision that can only be made by the person who's been wronged. Now think about this for a second. If I walked up to you and I was like, hey, how you doing? Bam, and just slapped you in the face, right? And then I went, peace, brother, peace, peace. What? No, it didn't work that way. You just hit me in the face. You can't punch somebody and they ask for peace, right? It's my turn. Let's go, bring it, son, It's my turn. And as your eyes are watering and you're starting to refocus and rage is building inside of you, you'd be like, did that person just say that? Right? You owe me for what you just did. I've been wronged and I now have a right to strike back. Justice, retribution, right? It's time for you to pay what you just did for me. Like your fingerprints are still on my face. Let's go. And herein lies the cycle. This is what we do as people. Man, it just spins and it escalates and it gets worse to the point that we forgot why it even started. And I hit you and you hit me. I take from you, you take from me. I lie about you, you do whatever you can to get back at me. And it cycles unless what would happen if the wounded person would say, I'm done? What happens if the one who takes the final blow decides to put an end to it and not strike back? That's choosing peace. It's being a peacemaker. When you decide to forego your right to retribution, the word in English that we would describe that is forgive. The word forgive means I am giving up my right to punch you back. It's my turn. You wounded me. You owe me a debt. right? You've created a debt when you just did that to me. When you made that comment about me behind my back, you created a debt and you owe me, and it's my turn to pay back. But what happens if I say, it's my turn, you owe me, but I'm going to let go of that debt? I'm going to choose peace, forgiveness. I'm giving up my right to strike back, which is so hard. Right? I mean, every time my kids are fighting, and I'm like, what's going on? She started it. He started it. I'm just responding to what they did, right? And as the adult in the room, I'm like, no, it's not the way to do it. I'm like, I do that every day. We've been doing it our whole lives. It's so natural. It just feels good. I want to hit you back, right? It seems like the right thing to do. Justice demands it. You owe me. They started it. I'm finishing it. This is why peacemaking is so hard. It is contrary to my thinking, right? It's foolishness. It doesn't seem right. It seems weird. It seems like, no, you owe me. If I don't hit you back, you get away with it, right? If I don't punish you, we can't just leave it undone. We can't live in a world where people are just doing things and there's no consequences. This seems wrong. And so we can't get around it. And I know it seems wrong. I feel it all the time. Anytime somebody wounds me and I hear this, forgive, let it go, I'm like, oh, forgive, like, right? And I would say that what's so important about having the right vision is because what feels wrong in my heart, I shouldn't let this go. I need to punish them. That's the only thing that makes sense of my pain, is to make them hurt as well. Everything in my heart says, fight back. If I can have the right vision, we're up here, God is saying, that's not the world I created. It's never going to get better if you do that. Trust me and obey me. Okay. And that's what it becomes. Being a peacemaker is this thing inside of me that says it doesn't always make sense. I don't necessarily like it. But my Creator told me this is the only way the world is going to get better, and so I'll obey. And in some ways, they are getting away with it. Oof. In some ways, they're not always getting what they deserve when you choose peace. Yikes, right? Now, I want to take a small detour here because we're walking on very dangerous ground. Please hear me when I say this. I am not saying that being a peacemaker means you can't protect yourself and that evil and violence should just reign rampant on the earth. I'm not a complete pacifist. If you broke into my home and want to hurt my children, the Hulk is coming out, and you might not be leaving my house. What I'm getting at, though, is more about in our relationships. On a grander scale, God does not want a world that injustice and evil just run rampant. I've heard pastors or peace, and like, what about Hitler? Should we have stopped him? No, peace. Like, you just let Hitler run across the world and kill everybody? Okay. I don't think that's God either. In fact, I think the Bible gives us an answer to that. Look at this passage with me. In the book of Romans, Paul is writing to the church, and he's explaining this new life they're living and trying to work through the difficulties. And he says, do not take revenge, but instead leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it's mine to avenge, I will repay. And I read that sentence, and I'm like, is this that whole like kind of pie in the sky, afterlife kind of thing? No, it's not, because when you think that, you haven't read the rest of the story. He moves on. In verse 1 of the next chapter, he says, let everyone be subject to governing authorities, for there's no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. Look at this sentence. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on wrongdoers. Very strong language. We can unpack it this way. What Paul is saying is this. There is a time and a place for the sword in our broken world. It is not a call to simply let evil and injustice run rampant, right? That is not what it means to be a peacemaker. What he's saying, though, is God's plan to deal with those issues is to take it out of your hands when you're angry and impassioned and to give it to somebody neutral, somebody impartial, a government authority, and say, let them deal with it, right? not for you to wage war yourself. Justice isn't served from private vendettas, right? That way madness lies. It's where all of our problems come in. Rather, God says, entrust governing authorities with the task of carrying the sword. So please hear me on this. And I wanted to talk about this because I've been in talks where I've heard pastors talk about peace, and I felt like they were just attacking everyone in the room that was a police officer or military. I want you to know, if you are serving in the military or police or security, we are for you. Like, we are behind you, and we appreciate you. And we're behind you because you choose to stand in front of us. You choose to do something that we don't have to do. We can choose peace because you've chosen your profession, and I want you to hear that. I thank you for that, all right? Like, I am so behind you, and I think the Bible's behind you. Yeah, for sure. But for the rest of us, and even for those of you that do that, you still have to go home from work. You still have to figure out what it means to choose peace in your life, to let go of your right to fight back. What does it mean to not punish that person, to not escalate the violence? Here's what I would say. It's a choice, okay? But you're not the only one choosing it. I started this with that video, and at the end of it, there was this crying baby, right? The voice of our Creator who took on human flesh to walk among us and bring peace. But how? Well, what I said earlier. Why is peace so hard? Because only the one who has been wounded can choose to end it. Only the one who's taken the final blow themselves can say, no more, I'm not striking back. And here's the amazing truth, guys. That crying voice in that little wooden box would grow to become a crying voice hanging from a wooden cross. But the cry that would be heard from all the people that were standing on that hill that morning was not anger. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to get all of you. The cry that people heard was, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. The voice of our God taking the last blow wasn't retribution, wasn't, I'm going to get you back for this. It was, I forgive you. And we can never forget, guys, that we are the traitors. The reason why God's perfect world that is good and he is at rest is no longer perfect and at rest is because of us. We have turned our backs on God. We are the ones that started fighting and killing each other. When he said, that's not the way I want you to live. We started this cycle. We rejected him as God. We spit in his face. We started it. We shook our fists at him and said, we don't want you telling us how to live our lives. We want to live our lives however we want. What a great job we did at that. And in the moment when he should have come down here in human flesh and said, now it's payback time. I'm going to finally punish you for what you did. What we instead see in Romans 5:8 is God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die while we were still sinners, while we were God's enemies. When it was his turn, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. He chose to send his Son while we were his enemies. We struck the first blow, right? We started it. But here in the person of Jesus, God himself took our worst shot. All the violence, all the vengeance, all the anger, all the hatred, the hostility, he let it fall upon his physical body. We ripped off his clothes, we whipped and we beat him and we mocked him and we took a scourge and tore his flesh. We stuck thorns in his brow. We yelled at him, we nailed him to a piece of wood and stuck him up in the air and laughed at him while he slowly suffocated to death. And there, hanging from a piece of wood, where all the people he was coming to should have been avenging, as the breath was fading from his lungs, the word that came out was this. He said this, tetelestai, which means it is finished. Peace. It's over. I'm taking it all, and I am not striking back. I give you peace today. He chose to ignore who started it, what we deserved. He chose to say, I'm not giving you payback right now. It's finished. Peace. Our plight was deserved, right? And he bridged this divide with himself and gave us peace. The war is over. Enmity between you and God is over. There is peace because of what he's done. And this is why we say that peace can only come through Jesus. This is so important. Hear me for a second. This is why we say only Jesus, because only God can forgive what we've done to God. Only the one who's been wronged who can say peace. The one who was ultimately wrong came to earth and said, it's finished, peace. And he offers it to you and I. It's finished, the war is over. He became one of us. He made himself an offering of peace. And therefore, being right with God only happens by accepting what he's done for us. And if you're sitting here this morning and you're like, I feel alienated from God, I want you to hear, he has called peace. And you can choose today to be made right with God. You can choose today to say, God, I accept what you've done. Thank you. I want peace as well. It's as simple as asking for it because of what he did. But it also means something else. It means that those who've accepted this, it means those who've looked at the cross and said, yep, thank you, God. I accept your peace. Thank you for forgiving me. Have to listen to something else. They have to listen to Jesus before he got up on that cross say this, if you want to be my follower, take up your cross. If you want to be my follower, take up your cross. There's a story that Jesus tells about a man who owed somebody a ton of money, like more money than he could ever pay. And he falls at his feet, like, I got nothing, I can't pay you. And the man says, you know what? I forgive you, your debts are forgiven. Wow. And then the man's, wow, that's so amazing. And someone walks up to him that owed him like $2. He's like, you owe me $2. Oh, sorry, man, I can't pay. Guards! And he threw him in prison. And Jesus told that story because he said, you see me hanging on the cross, are you choosing the cross? You see everything that I've forgiven you, and you won't forgive them? You see the moment that you should have been dealt death for what you've done, and I gave you life. So I'm telling you to forgive. I'm telling you to choose peace. Choosing the cross doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be martyred for your faith and die. It might actually mean that you have to live with being wronged. That's tough, but it's what Jesus calls us to because it's the only way to ever heal this world. And the retribution that we deserved, that we were owed, was forgiven. And then when that person comes and speaks those hurtful words to us, when they steal that job from us, when they go behind our backs, when they break faith with us, when they say those things they shouldn't have said, and you're like, I'm trying to get you back, Jesus says, look to the cross. When you say, you owe me, look and see that it's all already been paid. If your debts have been paid, the person who's wounded you has been paid. We're confronted every time we want to strike back, every time we want to fight, every time we want war, every time it's like, we need to drop bombs, we need to do something, let's go. We see this image of a bloody cross and a voice coming out from it saying, Father, forgive them. And the wounds that were poured out from him from that torturous death, the blood that ran down it, ran for you, for your forgiveness, for your peace. And then he says, now you go and make peace as well. And as a follower of Jesus, it is my call, it is my life dictate to say, I am following Jesus, and he went to the cross, so God, lead me to the cross. He gave up his rights. God, I give up my rights. And as I'm led to that cross, I see my name written in blood. My sin and my failures. How could I do anything other than forgive you as well? Our vision for 2020, maybe it's as simple as, God, lead me to the cross. Let my vision, let my eyesight be on that, Because when I look to that, I'm reminded that you've paid everything. And my anger and my desire for vengeance, what can it be next to what you did? I'm compelled to choose peace because the price paid for it was enormous. It was more than I could pay, and it's been paid. When I'm led to the cross, I see a God who so loves the world that he gave his only son to restore it, to end the fighting, to bring life. And so I pray and ask that daily, when the anger, God, lead me to the cross. When the hurt and the pain, God, lead me to the cross. And yes, maybe that person gets away with it. Maybe the government doesn't do anything to help. But the government didn't help him hanging on that tree. He just did it out of love for me. Will you choose the cross? Will you choose peace?